Hello, welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hello, Susan.
I'm here.
Hi. And we also have a very special guest today, Lou Rosenfeld, founder of Rosenfeld Media. They produce dozens of UX books, enterprise UX conference. I'm sure we'll talk about some of this stuff later. And he was also the co-author of Information Architecture, which was the Polar Bear book. He's a longtime IA guy, but maybe not so much anymore. That sounded, when he told me that was like cryptic, but hello, Lou.
Hi, great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for showing up.
All right, you should explain what Lou. I think a lot of people know what the Polar Bear book means, but some people might not.
Yeah, so with Peter Morville, I wrote what was I think the original title was Information Architecture for the World Wide Web, and that came out way back when, I believe it was 98, and it just came out a couple of years ago in its fourth edition, and we've renamed it Information Architecture for the Web and Beyond, and it's one of the books that really put information architecture on the map and put that practice on the map. So if people know me, it's probably because they're familiar with the book.
Well, but now you're famous for other things.
Oh, I don't know. I'm lightly famous for many things, but I'm not sure how much good that does. But yeah, I guess the arc for me, started off in librarianship, and that led me to thinking about how library science could help save the world as the information revolution crashed down upon us. And we took a lot of those principles from librarianship and tried to bring them over to the world of technology and the internet. And we wrote information architecture, again in the mid-90s. And Peter and I had a small firm called Argus Associates in Ann Arbor, Michigan, that did just that, and was kind of the seminal IA firm for many years. And then I was a solo consultant for a while in the wilderness of sorts, but that started around 2000, also around the time we started the Information Architecture Summit, which is, I think, on its 19th or 20th year now. Also the Information Architecture Institute, a year or two later, about 2002, which is the professional association for information architecture folks. But in that decade of the aughts, I already felt like IA was really important, but part of a bigger puzzle of user experience design. And got very involved in that community as it grew, tried to help get those various tribes of information architects and interaction designers and usability people and so forth together through an initiative called the User Experience Network, which tried and ultimately failed to be glue for all those associations and local groups and so forth that were really ultimately trying to work for the betterment of UX. And then in the, so I was working as a solo consultant, doing mostly IA for large enterprises. Did some barnstorming with Steve Krug, where we would teach one-day workshops in tandem in different cities, and but wanted to do something else. Wanted to have a product to show for it, because when as you know, I'm sure, Susan, one of the frustrating things about consulting is it's always somebody else's problem, and other people's problems are interesting, but not as interesting as your own. I always wanted to work on my own products where I could actually have an impact. So I started Rosenfeld Media as a hobby to publish books on UX. There was really nothing, no dedicated publishers for the growing field. And so our first book was Mental Models by Andy Young. We did Luke Wroblewski's web form design, and it started to pick up speed. We're now up to, I think we're about to put out Meeting Design by Kevin Hoffman, which is our 34th book. And along the way, we started doing conferences, because conferences are a form of expertise, just like books are, and it's often the same people. And so we do a couple of virtual conferences a year on different topics, but maybe more importantly, we started doing the Enterprise UX conference. We're coming up on our fourth one. That's this June 13th through 15th in San Francisco. And if you want to learn more, enterpriseux.net. And we also launched the Design Ops Summit on this new thing called Design Operations. And that started in November here in New York City, and we sold out the first one. And we're working on finding dates and a venue for this fall. And if you want to know more about Design Ops, come to designopssummit.com. And,
okay,
I have is that enough of a? Is that?
Oh my God!
Took over.
I have no.
I have so many questions.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions.
All right.
I know
Guthrie,
I have
you wanna
two.
go first?
Yeah. So, Lou, this is dealer's choice. Would you rather have a question about IA or a question about kind of conferences as a whole?
I'm happy to do my best with both, but I'm, it's funny. I get IA questions. People say, in your book on page 76.
Oh no.
And I never was like a detail-oriented information architect. I was always more at a strategic level. And so, like when someone asks me about the right way for a taxonomy to be designed, I start to sweat. Although
My
I feel
question has
like,
nothing to do with taxons, I promise.
good. All right, but you're welcome to try me, and at least you won't see me sweat.
So you're going information architecture then?
We can do both.
Okay.
We have an hour, right?
We do. Okay. So I was just, I've met a couple information architecture people, and libraries. You're not the first person to say, "Oh, library science," and I think that's. I remember being in college and learning that was a major and being interested by it, but I couldn't see how it was useful outside of the library system. Of course, I was young, 20. So, in what in some ways, it feels like information architecture is getting more popular, and it's certainly becoming more recognized, in my opinion. And in a lot of ways, I think it's in the same way you said, it's becoming rolled into a bunch of other stuff in the same way that, for example, and we see in our business a lot, right or wrong, a lot of companies we work with are rolling UX into the agile framework. And do you think that the kind of generalization of UX is a good thing, or is it troubling? And does my question make any sense whatsoever?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's a bunch of things, so let me try to unpack it.
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
So first of all, librarianship, there's a difference. This is like one of the things that really frustrated me about the library world was a focus on the venue, namely libraries, as opposed to the practice, which is librarianship. And like any other field where, the technology changes the name of the game, and although I'm a big believer in the value of libraries, and I think we've seen in the last 30 years a lot of change in what libraries are, especially public libraries, to communities, the traditional model that a lot of us were expecting to work in when we got out of library school is not what it was. It's not about physical structures filled with physical information. And, the beauty of librarianship is the emphasis on enabling humans to access information, and that has relevance everywhere, especially in the digital era. But if you only tie it up in physical spaces, traditional physical spaces, then you dramatically hamstring its future and your own, if that's how you're going to pursue your career. So, I remember, just feeling really frustrated with the focus on libraries. And I never necessarily wanted to be a librarian in a physical library. I've done some of that in my career early on, but it just seems like there's so much to offer the world when you are willing to free yourself from the shackles of traditional metaphors for how the work is done. So, think about librarianship as, again, this practice dedicated to helping people access information, to find it, to understand its value, to look at it critically. How could that not be relevant, or even more relevant than it's ever been in this day and age? I hope people feel that. And again, what we were trying to do was say, all right, for all you people building these digital libraries of sorts, what are you going to do when you have too much information? How are you going to go through it? What are you going to do when you have to make judgments about information, where some of it has more value than other types of information? How are you going to figure that out? How are you going to figure out what to do when you're encountering ROT, which is an acronym that I learned from an old client. It stands for redundant, outdated, and trivial information. So you get your information in good shape today. Wait a month. It's suddenly starting to rot. So these are all big challenges that were very kind of going to quickly hit people, and that was obvious to us in the mid-90s, and that's what our professors have been teaching us in library school. The information revolution is nigh, and you're going to have a role in it, but they never really told us what that role would be. And so that's why we wrote that book. Now, you were talking about, well, how are these things all seem to be rolling up with each other, and you actually made an interesting statement about information architecture growing in importance. We're actually seeing information architecture or information architects feeling the same pain that librarians felt 20 years ago. We feel like there's fewer job descriptions called information architect. And that worries a lot of us, just like the librarians felt worried. That doesn't mean information architecture is less relevant. It's probably more relevant than ever.
Right.
It's just, again, we get caught up in titles and career paths and expectations. And if we can break ourselves out of that, we're in good shape. I just was meeting with a group of people yesterday, had lunch with them from Bloomberg, really interesting organization. I'm sure anyone who's had any experience with them understands that. What a visionary company when it comes to how information is used. And, their take was, we're not really looking to hire information architects anymore, but we feel that information architecture is part of pretty much everything every one of us has to do. Now, the only risk there is, if no one is focused on it, there's a chance it falls through the cracks because it's less tangible, it's more conceptual than a lot of other practices in UX. But, I'm not worried about it. As long as more and more people are exposed to it and taking responsibility for it, I think we'll be in good shape.
So one of the things that I that haunts me, I guess, maybe I should just figure out how to let it go, but is the idea of what is, what are machines and AI going to do that we've been doing, that the humans have been doing. What do you think about AI and IA? AI.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a conversation that's been happening as long as I've been exposed to any of these fields. Certainly for me, going back to grad school in the late 80s, we were having the same conversation. And I think AI is more powerful than the skeptics, among whom I count myself, imagined it would be. But I also still think that it's got its power in fairly well-defined domains. Language is domain or context dependent, how we interpret language, how we understand language. And I don't know if that is ever going to be cracked by AI. So I think maybe what the people working in AI have done better and better is crack the nut of really defining contexts better or domains better. So a domain, we used to look at domains as being subject-oriented. So there's a domain of biochemistry, and language means certain things in biochemistry, and it means different things in a different domain like psychology. But I think we're starting to define domains in new ways now. So there is the domain of light conversation, like the light conversation that you might use to initiate interactions with Alexa. That's a different domain. And I don't know if we used to think of those as domains. If you can define that sort of conversation starter language as a domain, you can build AI more effectively for that domain. Does that make any sense?
It does. So you're saying actually, I mean, I was kind of asking the question about whether AI would take over, the design of information architecture. But interestingly, I think you're saying that one role of IA might be to assist with artificial intelligence.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, so you have to figure out the domain. What is a domain? What could a domain be? And the more narrow you go, the more effective AI is going to be. I'm not saying it's just information architects, but we can certainly help, have to understand what the domain could be, and that's largely dependent on understanding humans and having some research skills that help you do that. We also have to figure out what is the inherent structure or syntax that emerges from that domain. And that's certainly something that I think IA people can help with, because we're pretty good content modelers. But linguists are really important for that as well, especially computational linguists and others as well. And then there's the domain switching that I think is a real challenge. So, when you want to change the subject in a conversation, a lot of humans have a hard time keeping up. And you change the subject, and suddenly you're getting that quizzical look on other people's faces, and you say to yourself, "Oh, I just came up with a non sequitur." That's domain switching, and I think there's probably a lot of interesting design work in order to help AI understand, or the systems that help us access AI to understand that type of domain switching. And I don't know if IA people should be helping there, but we're people who work with information and people. So I like to think we're going to have something to contribute to all those challenges with AI.
Yeah, that's you got my head spinning.
If I got your head spinning, then I'm worried.
No,
that's not supposed to happen, Susan.
Worried if my head is spinning. No, I just think it's fascinating. I think that people, and I will count myself in this group, people who actually don't, live and think that deeply about information architecture, and I'm sorry to say I'm probably one of them. I think it's easy to put information architecture in a really little box and to think that, oh, I know what that is. That's deciding what categories you should have at your website.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's what you think IA is. That means, IA means I'm going to do a card sort on my next project,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's in this tiny little box, and not to realize that it's bigger than that and has more important implications for that than that. And I think so it's just one, I think it's an example when a field really well, like you do, IA really well, and you forget that the rest of us out here don't know it that well, and then it's just not on our radar, And
well, I think, there's some other issues though, right? I'm sorry to interrupt you though.
No, go ahead.
Well, I see the parallels between, librarianship of a couple decades ago and IA today. You have a community of people that are really not that good at promoting what they do.
What they do is complicated.
And, well, yeah. And then the other thing is, you're talking about highly intangible stuff, highly conceptual stuff that's really only noticeable when it sucks. It doesn't, you don't notice IA when it's successful. You only notice it when it fails. And, you know, that really makes things hard. And there's other fields like that. You could argue technical communication. People have been continue to be living in this difficult space that I'm describing. I wonder if the content strategists are starting to feel that way as well. We can keep rebranding ourselves and renaming ourselves, and that will help us for a while. But very soon, those framings and those labels start to become chains. And you define a practice which is helpful for a little while, but it becomes like certification. In fact, it often leads to certification. Well, what happens when the field changes and you're shackled by the idea of what it should be from a decade ago? Because, you know, someone in a certifying body or in an academic setting has finally caught up and for a point and planted a flag and said, this is what it means to be an information architect or a technical writer or what have you. You know, we're constantly fighting this battle of trying to march ahead in expanding our practices and what types of problems we can help solve, while at the same time we're fighting on the other front, which is trying to legitimize ourselves with academic and other credentials and paint a picture of what we actually do to the rest of the world. Those things are not in alignment for very long, if ever. And then you add in the conceptual aspects of these types of work, and we're constantly feeling stressed and like we're failing at making a case for ourselves.
But I think that is this most of the kind of I guess I can call it an industry, or the subjects that orbit around anything regarding design, I think really feel this pressure because there is this giant star that is the UCD. There's this there's this industry recognized process that this is kind of how things are, and everyone knows the steps, and maybe people don't follow it, but there's this standard of this is what the industry is, this is what we do, this is, you know, and then there are lots of subgroups. And I think that is by and far the exception rather than the norm. And you look at Agile, what does that mean? Every single company they say, we do Agile. Everyone says they do Agile. It's all different everywhere. There's 16 different competing things. You can do Agile in UX, even though it has nothing to do with UX. You can do Agile in programming. It's like this giant mashup. But it's very popular. It's almost like if information architecture became like a Silicon Valley buzzword, and so everyone wanted to use it, and they were all using it, you know, and they all bought your book, and they knew kind of what it was, but there was like 16 other books, and they had different terms and uses, and so it's like this giant mess, and they feel like there's no solid footing. But I think that's maybe the norm of most fields and industries, and it's only, you know, you have to have some sort of giant standard for everyone to rally, you know, plant their flag in and be like, okay, we are in, you know, this place. Otherwise, it's hard to do. Not that it's a bad thing. It's just kind of how it is.
Well, it's also there's a certain fatigue that we all feel from change, and some of us feel fatigue because things are changing around us and we feel maybe a lack of control, and others feel fatigue when things aren't changing or we're not able to change them. So we're facing this right now. I'll be up front with you. The Enterprise UX Conference is, you know, we're going into our 4th year, and we're having a bit of an existential debate internally about what this conference should be in 2019. Should we keep doing enterprise UX? Well, you know, there are lots of people who do UX in enterprises who've never even heard of the conference. So from that perspective, we should just kind of keep repeating a really successful event and dig deeper into the audience that we know is out there. And from a business perspective, that certainly can make good sense. On the other hand, we're also feeling the sense of, well, but it's what's going on in enterprise is changing.
Right.
And we need to broaden and bring in the CX people and the product managers and other people who really care about the experience, who don't necessarily align themselves with UX, and maybe rebrand ourselves as the Enterprise Experience Conference. Now, like, I feel I'm one of those people who wants things to change, or I feel fatigued. I don't necessarily want to do the same thing every year. So I want to change it. And other people in my organization feel like, well, if we keep changing it, it's wiping us out. Can't we repeat something that's successful? Right. And just dig deeper into the audience? So I'm trying to figure out if we can do both. And I don't know. I mean, a lot of this depends on the sort of nature, the personality of the people involved, and what excites them and what feels like a drag.
Susan, do you have questions? Otherwise, that was a perfect segue into my my previous conference question that I hinted earlier.
Guthrie.
So conferences. So I have a quick question for both of you, and then I'll ask your conference question. Talking about change. You guys have been around the block in this neck of the woods.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yes.
And yeah, right. Susan, did you ever write a book? Okay, I'll never mind. I will move on. There was millennial quips in there, so I'll just let them sit. But can you guys think back and remember any job titles that were pretty popular that have since moved on, that have since become extinct
in our world?
Yeah.
You don't mean blacksmith. You mean like
no.
20 years.
No. It's like internet-y, computer-y,
webmaster,
design-y. What?
Webmaster.
Webmaster. Yeah. Any others?
Some people would argue information architect. I'm not quite sure.
It's true, though. I mean, what you said before, Lou, there are, if you look at what the jobs are, they might mention information architecture, but I don't know that they are called.
Right.
We are hiring an information architect. Guthrie, I don't know. Job titles that are no longer there. Are there still business analysts?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. The business
really?
Oh my God, times 1,000. So I was an econ major, and Lou, and a lot of my friends are business analysts.
Oh.
All it means is here's all of our data. Make pretty spreadsheets so that the mid-level managers know what's going on and glean insight. It's very broad, but it's generally, that title as a catch-all. That would be like saying, to a certain extent, it's like saying I'm a designer. Or I'm a usability designer, right? Usually your title would be more specific, but yes, business analyst definitely is still around.
Okay.
Anything else? I mean, webmaster was pretty good. I don't know why that went away. I mean, I know why it went away, but I think as a title, having webmaster. I mean, webmaster is pretty cool. just my.
You just like the master title.
I mean, it's great. All
right, now did you have a conference question, Guthrie?
Yeah, okay. I'll roll on to more serious affairs. I have seen in my so there's weird stuff happening in the conference industry, if I can say that term.
Mm-hmm.
It's conference market, I suppose, would be a better term. And I'd like your take on it, because it is both a blessing and a curse at the same time. When a bunch of years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, there were a couple, key large conferences that everyone went to. And
you're talking about in the field of usability and
specifically, yes, but also generally. I mean, think about how big CES was.
Yeah.
That was the event. And what has happened is that there's everyone and their dog now has a podcast and a conference. It's like the two things that everyone has to have. And there's just been this explosion in the number of conferences. But at the same time, in the same way that there's been, for example, like I talked about earlier, an explosion in people doing agile, that you've lost the kind of central command and control. And so now, I mean, how many quadrillion UX conferences are there in the States? I don't even know. Every UXPA chapter has a conference, and there's just a trillion of them. And what it's really done is it's kind of diluted all the big ones. And so now there's just this kind of, instead of having like these pillars, like CES, where this is where everything gets released, there's just, it's this, what do you call like when there's a bunch of bacteria and they all grow together and they form like
what is that called?
It's like,
I know what you're
like
talking
the
about.
bacteria kind of like phlegm ecosystem that they all just kind of exist in. It's just like this kind of like mesh dispersed forever.
You're saying that all the conferences are like a bunch of bacteria.
Thanks, man.
That's really good, Guthrie.
They grow and multiply, so that's not a bad thing.
No, but it's an interesting point.
And do you think that's a I mean, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know if you have a take on it, but it certainly is a challenge when you're trying to put your flag in the ground of this is what we are. And you're putting, and it's a river where the stuff is sloshing around all the time, and there's nothing solid.
It's interesting for me. I helped start a conference in 2000 that's still around, the IA Summit. And so I have some experience, and my company, Rosenfeld Media, was doing a couple of virtual conferences on different topics for a year for a long time, and they're pretty low risk. And around 5 years ago, my staff said, why don't we do an in-person conference, a real conference? And I said, I don't know. I think we've reached peak UX conference. This is like 5 years ago. and then an opportunity to put on Enterprise UX kind of fell in our laps. Rackspace approached us and said, we'll partner with you. We'll give you a venue. Will you make it happen? And
sure.
We decided to do it. And it was actually a really great thing to do, and great for us. And now, we're coming up on our fourth, and we launched this other conference, Design Ops, and it's just changed everything for us. So all right, with those biases coming into this conversation, I'd say that, it seems like it's too much. Like there's so many and it's fragmented, and where do you go? And there's so many to choose from. I would counter and say, well, first of all, they're not all the same. I mean, I've been to some great conferences, and I like to think our conferences are among them from a production perspective and a programming perspective. And I've been to some really bad conferences. I've even spoken at some really bad conferences. And so they're not all the same. And I think that's not surprising, because it's new for a lot of people, and a lot of people decide to start putting in conferences, and they don't realize what an undertaking they're getting themselves into, and sometimes
it truly is a giant undertaking.
Unbelievable, and a lot of money can be involved. And I've seen well-meaning people basically ruin their careers through not being able to pay speakers when they were promising and all that kind of thing. So there's that. So they're not all the same. They're becoming more specialized. I mean, think about CES, and then think about like all the various contexts that consumer electronics have today.
Yeah.
And do you really
World Conference and
can you really have them in one place?
Yeah.
Then I would also say that a lot of the conferences, probably some of the big ones you're thinking of, that are associated with professional groups or associations, have started to lose their way, partly because the value of those associations has diminished over time. In other words, we are very clearly becoming less tribal. It used to be a time,
Yeah.
And Susan, I'm sure, we both went through this, that you went to grad school, you took a certain type of program in psychology or library science. You read certain things, you learned certain tools and methods, you went to certain conferences, you published in certain journals, and that's the way it was. And you were not only discouraged from doing that type of exploration in other areas; it was unheard of. And you know what? You're not going to the ALA annual. You're going to go to this event on programming. What's wrong with you? And now it's I mean, think of UX. Think of all the tribes under that umbrella, and how UX now itself is mixing with all these other areas. And
Right.
So there's a lot of like looseness about how we affiliate ourselves that wasn't there in the past. And we have more choices because it's cheaper to, even though it's a big commitment, it's still easier and cheaper to put on conferences today than it might have been even 10 years ago, because of technology, because of easier ways to market and so forth. And then out of all that, people need ways of making sense of their work and how it fits together with other people's work in the world. So if you're doing design today, it's not like, there's this guidance. You go to the same type of grad school, you read the same publications, you go to the same conferences. That's all out the window. Who are your peers now? Who do you learn from? You need people to work together and understand and come together with to make sense of what it is you do. And so conferences are probably the best way for people to do that. When we put on Design Ops last November, we had no idea who was going to come and how many people were going to show up. It was a real risk. But we had the feeling that there were enough people out there that were trying to essentially work as COOs for design organizations and struggling, that they would come, even if it was a new conference, because they are looking to make sense with other people of what it is they do. And we see conference programming as a exercise not only in sense making but in defining. So like I used to say when someone would ask me, how do you define information architecture? And I just I don't know. I don't can we throw out the dictionary approach to defining things that are large and complex? Because it's just silly. Why don't we look at other exercises in definition? Like a conference program is an exercise in definition. Look at the conference programs for IA. Look at the things that are being written, books and so forth. That's really a way to define and make sense of what these new areas are, these very interdisciplinary areas where the boundaries have come down. And I see that even more now. And I'll just tell you one more thing. I know I'm giving unbelievably long answers here, but you really got me excited here. I wrote a piece in Medium about 5 years ago, because it was called How to Organize a Conference. And I wrote it because I hadn't organized a modern conference. I had done IA Summit 15 years earlier. Now I had this opportunity to program enterprise UX and put it on. And so I went to all the people I knew that were putting on conferences, and I asked them questions, and they were very generous with their advice. And the article is basically a write-up, or a summary of all the advice they gave me. I cite them all, probably about 30 people giving me advice. And every week, Medium sends me the stats for my Medium postings. And that article has gotten so much traffic, and it's growing. It's my indicator of the market for people who are thinking of organizing conferences. In fact, if you Google how to organize a conference, it's probably the first thing that's going to come up. And it's insane, but I think it says something that people are desperate to make sense of what they're doing together. New things, we need people to come together to make sense of them. And conferences are a perfect way to do that.
I think, and my intuition about why there's been such a fracturing, and I'd like to get both of you's opinion on this, is that, back in the day, you could, like you said, you go to college, you become a specialist, and then you get hired to work in that specialty. And in the, today, most of the firms we go to, the people who are, for example, doing UX, they do graphic design and they do sales a little bit, and they work with clients, and they do they do programming, and they're doing, in their project management, they're running all these hats at the same time. And so they, to a certain extent, can't care about the specifics of maybe what they're what they were educated in their field in, because that's not what their day-to-day is. And that's maybe why you're seeing that loss of tribalism, because everyone's becoming a generalist.
Or we have to at least stretch beyond what we were trained to do. And I mean, I think, there's no secret that a lot of people in the field who've been professionally trained are desperate for what are oddly called soft skills.
Yeah.
How to communicate, how to negotiate, how to lead.
And in the legal field, which I'm an attorney, though, by training, or by not by practice, but and the soft skills, how to learn how to be a business person so that you can succeed in law is all the rage in that specialized industry as well.
Well, how to listen to people. And really, it's like, we weren't taught any of this. And even the programs today that purportedly are at the forefront of training, let's say, designers, are still really notoriously weak in areas like this. Do you think General Assembly is really teaching people how to listen and how to lead? I'm not sure they should, but on the other hand, they're saying, you take our program and spend your $15,000 or whatever, and you'll get a great job. Well, I don't know. If you can't do those things, that won't take you past the first year or two.
And then on the other side, we go into these companies, and there are these developers who that went to school for hardcore development stuff, and their bosses that come down and say, hey, you guys are the design department, so come up with some good ideas. And like they have to learn about UX, so like they're becoming generalists, not just on the UX side, but from the dev side as well.
Now imagine the discord in a person's mind when they invested so much of their time and effort to become a specialist, and then they find themselves in the workplace and find that there are few avenues to stay a specialist. And even in those avenues, let's say you become a senior practitioner in X.
Yeah.
That's you
become a mid-manager.
In your career. Well, or you just hit the ceiling, and you're a really good information architect. You're a really good interaction designer. You can't really advance. You can only be a really good one, which means, by the way, you are a really expensive one. And at some point, you're going to be too expensive to carry.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, you guys are just depressing. All right, I have I have some questions.
I'm an economist. It's the dismal science.
I'm going to jump in here.
Yeah.
Because before we started recording, you made a comment, Lou. You said, we could talk about how we do user research for our conferences.
Sure.
So since we're talking about conferences, what does that mean? What kind of research do you do?
The serious user researchers out there will probably say, well, that's pretty light. And so I'm obviously trying to inoculate myself against that before I even explain by saying, take a look at how many conferences do anything in terms of user research, and then come back to me. But so let me give you an example. We see the conferences as products, and we're a publisher from the get-go. So, just like our books take time and iteration, and they take the expertise of many people, not just the author, to get them into a publishable stage so that they can actually become products. We see conference programs the same. And so while it's tempting to just say, we're going to have a conference on X and who's really smart and well known on X, let's get them and have them show up and give their talks. I mean, to me, as someone who's spoken at a lot of conferences, that's what I see. There's very little design or thought given to the program as a collective whole, much less preparation for the speaker. It's just show up and give a great talk. I mean, you know, I'm a fairly well-known speaker, and I've failed terribly because I wasn't prepared. It's partly my fault, but it's partly the conference organizer's fault for not helping me understand my audience and what their expectations were and what would make a successful talk and what wouldn't for that particular event. So we spend the time doing that. I'll give you an example of what we're doing for Enterprise UX 2018. We normally have 4 themes for every conference. It's a single track conference, so each of those themes is like a quarter of the event. It's like a mini conference with its own speakers, its own leader, and so on. And what we do, this year, is we started by doing a substantial effort to survey our audience about what themes they would find of interest and what trends they would find of interest. We actually asked about topics and trends. We did it with an open-ended survey, like, you know, a couple questions, but open-ended, and got, I don't know, 200-300 responses. And then the other curators and I did the lovely job of combing through those responses and trying to detect patterns. We came up with patterns. We came up with 4 themes. And then what we did was we found people to essentially be our theme leaders. So now we have, we've now gone from 4 curators to 4 curators plus 4 theme leaders who have input into this process and input into selection. But the user research wasn't done yet. Then what we did was we put out more surveys around who you might like to have speak at our conference on these themes. So not just like, well, who do you like, but who would really have a lot to say about scaling design within an enterprise, or about how enterprises can go about investing, that's another theme, in design in the enterprise. And so we actually gathered, about 100 names of people, some self-nominated, but mostly suggested by others who could potentially speak at our conference. Now, one reason we did this was, just like anyone else, the curators of our conference have their own networks and the names of people they already know. You know what you do when you're putting together a conference, you say, who do I know who would be good for this, good for that, et cetera, et cetera. And now you just have totally closed down the universe of potential speakers, and you've reinforced your own cultural biases. So that's why you get a lot of conferences where the programs are full of white guys in their 30s, because they're programmed by white guys in their 30s. We didn't want that. So, we really are trying. It's not just an issue of gender and race and issues like that, but it's also an issue of just getting outside our networks and getting into, maybe there's people out there that are doing really interesting work that we just wouldn't normally come across. So we're trying to have a diverse program. Now we've got our 100 names. We sit down with our theme leaders. We comb through the names, and we look at their, why were they submitted? What's interesting about them, and how do they fit together? Okay, we've got to come up with 3. We're in the process of doing that right now. 3 speakers per theme, 12 total. And they have to fit together. You can't have all the same kind of perspectives, represented. And that's part of the goal of having a diverse group of people speaking about the same theme. When you sit down in a systematic way and look at them together, then you're actually looking at the pieces fitting together. Rather than, we started with so-and-so, now let's get another person, and then let's get another person. And, it's not really systematic that way. If you do it all at once, you do it in a more systematic way. Next, once we have our speakers, which we're going to announce hopefully in early February, we have we don't even have a program yet. We just basically have our speakers and our themes. Then what we do is we get our speakers to work together with the theme leaders over 4 or 5 months, where they come up with a bunch of ideas together. They brainstorm. They're not bringing canned talks necessarily. They're saying, what's really interesting about what I have to say about this theme? Here's my ideas. What are your ideas? And you look to see how those ideas fit together or don't fit together. And if they overlap too much, then we need to adjust. If they're too contrary, then that's okay. We just need to be ready for that. You can have people on a program with very different perspectives. You just don't want them to ambush each other. So we have them iterate, and eventually they give a dry run of their talks a few weeks before the conference, and they hear each other. And they're facilitated by their theme leader, and they're guided the whole way by the theme leader, but they have learned from each other, and their talks fit together. And it's a cohesive product. And then as a final touch, we have our speakers work with a speaking coach toward the end to make sure they've kind of dealt with the, various little nits that can make a presentation less interesting or come off less professionally. So it's an involved process that involves user research. It also involves the equivalent of book editing over time. And we think that is something that really distinguishes a conference. It's not just throw a bunch of people together and hope for the best.
Yeah, it's really a program then, more than just a conference. I remember, I think a lot about conferences because, like you, I speak at a lot of them, and from the, and I attend some of them, and I attend some of the ones I speak at, and then attend the rest. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to have the point of view of what it's like as an attendee versus what it's like as a speaker, because that's a really different experience as well. But there are so many things in the interaction design of a conference that are so critical to what the experience of the conference is, either from the speaker point of view or the attendee. And I'll just give you one little one that you made me think of when you were talking about, the speakers working together and seeing each other's talks and, ahead of time and so on. It's just the conferences where there is a deep interaction of the speakers during the conference and maybe even after the conference, and at least some before the conference. Mm-hmm. Is just from a speaker's point of view, it's such a different experience. I remember I attended I spoke at the first UXLX conference.
Mm-hmm.
That conference?
I spoke.
Bruno, who puts that on.
He defines the speaker experience. They do the best.
I remember the first, and I spoke at the first one, and Steve Krug was there, your dear friend, and just such a wonderful person, and I had known Steve before, but then there were lots of people there that I didn't, I had either known of but hadn't met, or people I didn't even know about. But he does, the things he had us do together, the speakers, and the fact that we were able to interact together before the conference started. Mm-hmm. And then during and then after, we were able to attend each other's workshops and,
I was thinking some sort of like bond, the survival bonding camps where they take you out into like the snowy woods. And you have to like start a fire together.
No, not quite that much. Although we did have an interesting experience the day after the conference that really bonded us. But what happened? There's just it makes everything come together. Even the conferences where you just at least you go out to dinner the night before and meet. There are so many conferences where you never meet the other speakers unless you happen to run into them in the green room or something. And so it changes the whole feel for the speakers and therefore I think for the attendees when you have that cohesiveness, and it makes from a speaker's point of view, it makes the conference really memorable. I mean, I have long-term friendships from some of these conferences.
Exactly.
That are so important to me and mean so much to me, and it's because we had a chance to interact. And there are many conferences I speak at where there is no opportunity to do that. There's none. I mean, and I find it really interesting. Like, you'll be talking to the conference organizer and preparing, and doing all the things you have to do before you speak, and I've recently spoken at some conferences that where they say things like, well, just come in the night before. We're just going to pay for we're going to pay for your hotel just the night before.
Right.
And it's like a 2 or 3 day conference, but they're not going to pay for your hotel for any of the other nights, so, and I remember talking to this one organizer and saying, so do your speakers usually like stay and listen to the other speakers? Oh no, she said. You just come in, you give your talk and you leave. Like they don't even stay the rest of the day. And I was like, really? They don't?
I don't get it.
Yeah, I was like, what? I mean, I stayed. I wanted to hear the other talks, but it was so disjointed. I mean, you just kind of like, got up on the stage and gave your talk and left the stage. And then, as far as they were concerned, you were done.
I mean, when we tell speakers for our conferences about the expectation of prepping in advance and working together,
you lose people.
Well, we definitely get people say, you're not paying me enough for that. And why should I do? I don't want to do that. Or they pay lip service and then they don't really follow through. And we can't always predict that, obviously, and it's tough. And I get it. I don't really particularly want to spend a lot of time, getting ready to give a talk. To me, hell is making slides. But I've had speakers come to me at our conferences who say, you know what, I was really skeptical when you asked me to speak about how much work it would be, and I now have learned something. I didn't just give a talk, I actually developed my ideas. I also learned from other people, and I've got some relationships that I think are going to last well after the conference. And as a conference organizer, that's the best thing you can ever hear. That is the best thing, at least from a speaker.
All right, you have to tell us about design ops. I don't even know what that term really means, and I'm not going to ask you to give a definition because we know that's.
I can try. In this
no,
case.
but you could just tell us about describe, for instance, the conference and who's speaking and what the topics are going to be on, if you want to, as a way to describe what that means. But.
Well, I wish I could do that for the one in November or October. We're not at that point yet.
Yeah.
But with design ops, the first one we did that was last November in 2017, and I think it was as late as May or June that we were deciding that it was something we were going to do, which is pretty fast.
That's pretty fast.
It's pretty risky.
Not ideal. Right?
No, but we were getting whiffs from a lot of different places and people that there were, that design organizations inside of large companies and other enterprises were reaching a critical mass where they were large enough and complex enough that there were substantial operational challenges to helping them succeed. So, your IBM, your Capital One, all of a sudden you have 400 or 1,000 or more people in your design organization. And it's like a company. It needs, you have to think about recruiting and onboarding and maintenance and education, or retention, I should say, not maintenance, and education for your people. You have to think about the systems that your people are going to need to be successful, whether it's pattern libraries, or design systems, or systems for scaling up user research. There's principles that should be the way you guide these organizations and their people. You know, the values are important. There are ways of structuring these organizations, just like any other organization, how centralized, how decentralized, hybrid systems. You know, these are all issues that are ultimately falling into the laps of people that might be called design ops managers, or they might be called they may be called chiefs of staff to whoever the design leader is. They might be called COOs even for design organizations. And they are struggling because no one has really stepped back and said, this is the thing, and here's what's involved, and more importantly, here are people like you, go learn from each other. And, so we said, let's make that happen. And let's bring in 3 types of people to speak on our program. Let's bring in people who are working in companies, let's say like Pinterest or Etsy, where design has been baked in from the very start, but they're maturing, and they may not have a strong culture of operations or strong tradition of operations. Now you have to bring operations into that setting. That's one type of challenge. Another type of challenge, and a second type of speaker we brought in, were the ones who were working in the GEs and the IBMs that are established and do have strong traditions of operations. But design was new. So how do you then expand those operations organizations to accommodate design? Or how do you build a new design ops organization that hooks up with the established operations group? And then there was another group of people we brought in to speak, a third group, which were the people who are traditional operations people, who one person was Stephen Pollard, who works for Arup in the UK, whose company builds terminals at Heathrow, talking about operations, not from a design perspective, but just from an ops perspective, and what does it mean for design. Or Aaron Hoffman-John talking about the operations and the framing that people in the video game design world use. Or Crystal Philcox talking about operations from the perspective of doing that inside places like the IRS and the GSA. So, that's how we went about it. We also had a lot of exercises to help people frame what design operations meant for themselves. That was led by Dave Gray from X-Plane. And, I think we're further along in terms of defining it. And the trend that I think you've probably seen as well is that a lot of the talent in our field is going to work in-house, typically inside of large organizations. It's part of teams or design organizations. And it's only going to be more and more of a challenge to operationalize what they do. And as we move from design thinking to, as John Pokel puts it, design doing, we need help. And that's what design ops is about.
That is a great, you did a great job explaining that.
Thank you. Trying.
Hey, I have one other question before we have to sign off. Tell me about books coming up.
Oh, thank you.
Rosenfeld Media.
I have, I'm holding it up, but you can't see it, obviously.
No, I can't see it, Lou.
It's a beautiful book. It's by Kevin Hoffman, who's actually now at Capital One. And it's called Meeting Design for Makers, Managers, and Everyone. And Kevin is trying to crack the nut of this horrible thing that we all have to deal with, namely meetings. And if you design them like you design other things, it can be better. And that's what Kevin is helping us do.
That'll be a great book.
So that is, I don't know what our pre-order date is. It's coming out on March 15th. It should be on pre-order.
Oh, so pretty soon.
Yeah, certainly by February 15th. So we're coming up fast on that. Then we have Orchestrating Experiences coming out, I believe, May 1 by Chris Risden and Patrick Quattlebaum, who actually work at Cap One now because they were people who came out of Adaptive Path and they get acquired by Cap One. And that's a book that's, you could sort of say it's a UX book, but it's really more of a service design book. It really gets into the orchestration of not just the experiences, but the people who have to work together to design those experiences as systems, with multiple touch points, spanning multiple media, just like you would expect from any service design book. But they've got incredible experience in this area that they're sharing in this book. And then, let's see, coming up next, coming up this year is, I think June 15th will be Jorge Arango's currently titled Living in Information. Jorge is someone well known in the IA world. He's an architect. He actually was the lead author in many respects of the 4th edition of the Polar Bear book. Fantastic guy, fantastic writer, really brought a whole sense of placemaking and understanding where you are and how to make information not just findable but understandable, often through that lens of place. He brought that to the Polar Bear book, and now his new book, Living in Information, is really getting into how we are actually living and working in spaces where information is all around us. We do really live in information, digital as well as physical, and really hybrids. And what he's trying to do is help us understand our roles as designers in developing those environments better by using the metaphor of place. We really are designing places full of information of all these types, and to do so in an ethical way. So that's going to be a really important guide for helping keep our toes to the fire when it comes to designing experiences, especially information-rich experiences, which are what isn't, that are really not trying, that really are ethically grounded.
Lou, we could keep going, but we can't keep going. But we may have to have you on again at some point, because I have this whole list of topics and questions we didn't even get to, but it was so much fun having you on. Tell us, if people want, you got so much going on with the books and the conferences, if people want to get in touch with you and find out more about any of this stuff, where should they go?
Well, rosenfeldmedia.com.
Okay.
So some of our books are under a new imprint, which, because of bad IA, is not easy to find from Rosenfeld Media. The new imprint is called twowagsbooks.com, and that's where meeting design and living in information will be published. We're working on it, but you can always get those from Amazon, rather you buy from us. But we get it. And for the conferences, enterpriseux.net, designopssummit.com. Finally, I've started a monthly Design Ops community conference call. Those have been really fun. It's free. If someone is really interested in Design Ops, email me and I'll add you to the invitation list. We're doing them once a month. My email address is lou@rosenfeldmedia.com. And Susan and Guthrie, it's been an absolute pleasure to be given the opportunity to yammer on for an hour. Thanks so much. We really appreciate it. And great questions, great conversation.
We really enjoyed it. All right. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
And if anyone has any questions about anything else, they can email us at info@theteamw.com. Thanks, everyone, and we will talk to you later.